Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am your host, as always. And joining me today is a very special and returning guest, Mr. Kent Swanson, host of the Kansas City podcast for the KC Sports Network. Kent, thanks for joining me today, man. What's up? How you doing?
Hey, more than happy to be on. Thanks for having me on again. It's gonna be a fun season, I think. It's gonna be a couple highly paid quarterbacks here in the
Yes.
AFC West going against each other.
Yes, a lot of money being thrown around in the AFC West for quarterbacks. Some of it more justified than other money being thrown around. But hey, you know what it is, what it is. But what we're gonna have a great conversation about the Chiefs and the state of the Chiefs, and talk with Kent here about some of the biggest burning questions facing the Chiefs this year. So some great intel as we kind of round into the regular season. Before we dive into the nitty gritty, just like what's the vibe this year? I'm always so curious about the way that coaches and teams handle like coming off of a Super Bowl. And I've heard about Andy Reid and his physical practices, right? But like you've been at training camp, what's the vibe around the Chiefs right now?
Uh, you know, you would think it's a little flat, but honestly, I think the vibe is I think Mahomes is continuing to Patrick Mahomes is kind of continuing to push this team forward, and he's kind of pushing on some standards. It's kind of interesting. You talk a little bit about that, and the first preseason game, the ones looked terrible,
Mm,
but Mahomes kind of tried to keep the energy going around the rest of the group to kind of continue to like push them to kind of play harder and show some intensity and show some urgency because he thought they showed up flat to start that game. And so I think it's like, it's probably a little weird going from your last game being the Super Bowl to, a half-filled Superdome in New Orleans for a preseason game.
yeah.
But I think I think that was kind of like a moment of like the urgency's got to pick up every single day kind of thing, if that makes sense. And so I think the guy leading from the front is the guy setting the standard, which is great. And I think he's kind of pushing for urgency because I think he's chasing Tom a little bit or trying to.
Yeah, yeah, and rightfully so. I mean, his appearance on the quarterback series was as a casual football fan, right? It was a lot of fun to watch, and the way that he's able to push through these things, and we'll get to another standard holder for the Chiefs. That's obviously Chris Jones. There was a report by Tony Pauline today, apparently, that there's not been a ton of recent communication between the Chiefs and Chris Jones. Is this something that's going to bleed into the regular season, or you think this dispute gets handled before week one?
Yeah, depends on the definition of handled, right? Because like I think Chris Jones will be in camp sooner rather than later. I do
Mm,
think, he's gonna miss this next preseason game just because of the acclimation period that's required for all these players. So even if he reported right now, he'd still miss this week 2 game. He's running out of runway to kind of get game ready a little bit, but
mhm.
I do think that he will be in a Chiefs jersey playing in week 1 of the season. It's just a matter of if he's coming back with a long-term extension. I think we're getting pretty close to, kind of a do or die moment where the Chiefs probably, like there's hey, you know what, we're going to play the season out and see where we're at next year, which is probably code word for we're probably not paying you. But I think that's kind of where I think that's kind of close to what we're getting. He's going to be in camp sooner rather than later. I would anticipate. It's just
Mm.
he might not have a deal, and it might just be time for him to play the season out and ball out and do what he did last year and go get paid elsewhere.
Wow, that's a massive, massive thing to be hearing right now. I was not expecting that. The defensive tackle market has really
hmm
exploded this year.
hmm
I assume he's trying to get closer to Aaron Donald, and that might be the hang up of where the Chiefs are coming from right now.
So I think the problem is the gap between Quinnen Williams and Aaron Donald is just such a huge, massive number that I think it's throwing a wrench in negotiations. And yeah, there's some reports. I know Tony Pauline has said that recently. There's reports that maybe he's asking for the Aaron Donald or close to the Aaron Donald money. There's been some conflicting reports about that, about how big the number is. $30 million. I know $30 million is another, key number that's been thrown around. It doesn't seem like the Chiefs are really even willing to get to 30 with him. So that's just, from all indications. So it seems pretty contentious in the fact that like I feel like training camp's a natural deadline, right?
Mm,
The first game of the season isn't really a natural deadline. He
right.
probably if conversations were going well, I think there would be a deal struck by now. There are Brett Veach even said like last week we might need to take a breath. Like both parties need to relax,
Mm.
step back, and maybe get into renegotiations sooner rather soon. But it doesn't seem super optimistic from the outside looking in, and the clock is definitely ticking. Something has to be agreed to pretty quick here. You'd have to think if he's going to get a long term deal.
Wow, this is really catching me off guard. I haven't been paying attention that closely, but this is kind of sounding like the Khalil Mack Raiders situation. Do you think it gets to that point where they potentially are talking about a trade instead of an extension?
I would be stunned if they trade him in, this season. This entire
Okay.
offseason's been built around trying to get something done with him. This team's been built around expecting Chris Jones to play. I do think it's possible that the Chiefs could tag and trade him out after this season. It's a big cap hit to hold on to for however long it takes you to get, to move Chris, but it's not the worst thing in the world to have Chris Jones on a contract year. His best seasons have been on contract years, and this would I mean, last year was kind of treated as such, and this year would kind of obviously be the same thing.
Mm.
So, I don't think they'll trade him before the season. I think that would be a really bad move. But I do think it's possible that they could move on from him after the season in some kind of tag and trade situation, get some draft capital back for him.
Wow. I mean, this team just traded Tyreek Hill. I guess I shouldn't be that surprised. But man, that's Chris Jones is such a great player, and selfishly, I would love to see him out of the AFC West, obviously.
No, for sure. And he is a great player. And, he showed out last year. Last year was his best season. Played the run consistently, did all the things that Joe Cullen, the defensive lines coach, asked him to do. But, it's also, it's tricky navigating the salary cap for this team. And, like there's some other players that they want to pay at some point too. And, they got to figure all that out with Chris. So it's going to be an interesting time and something that's going to be fascinating to watch him navigate for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll pivot gears here to some of his teammates that are practicing. Obviously, the Chiefs have invested back-to-back first-round picks in pass rushers with George Karlaftis and Felix Anudike-Uzomah. What's been the reports out of these young pass rushers as this group kind of steps into their own without Frank Clark and Carlos Dunlap returning from last year's team?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty positive reviews. Felix Anudike-Uzomah kind of had a slow start. He missed some of the off-season workouts and he had a little slow start into training camp, but he showed out in that first game and kind of showed some of the reasons that there's reasons to be optimistic about him. He's got some ability to run up the arc. He can bend it a little bit. Still kind of working to utilize his hands consistently, but he showed a lot. George Karlaftis, I don't know, like there's steps for him to take for sure as a player, but I don't know if he's ever going to be your, true number one edge rusher type.
Mm.
That's why the Chiefs need Chris Jones back because he is the, premier presence for that defensive front. But as a complementary piece, like I think the likes of George Karlaftis, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, both really strong rookies, and they've still got a Mike Dana. They've got Charles Omenihu after the first 6 games of the season. He'll be back. So, they've got some good options, but they're all more complementary pieces at this point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I liked Felix Anudike-Uzomah. I thought he was a little bit underrated in the draft, but yeah, I felt like that was the right landing spot for him in like the late or early 30s, late 20s. So I think that the Chiefs did find value there. Is there any pass rusher that might like surprise folks? Because I think with Spagnuolo and his scheme, like there's always that one pass rusher that can kind of come out of nowhere. Is there anybody under the radar right now for the Chiefs that we should be aware of right now?
So I think, Felix has looked really good. So there is one. Tershawn Wharton, the interior defensive lineman, is coming back from Missouri S. And, he's from Missouri S&T. He was an undrafted free agent. Tore his Achilles last season and is coming back from that. So he's working back, from that injury. He's a disruptive pass rusher specific along the interior. But the dark horse, I think, to keep an eye on if everything kind of works out well for him, BJ Thompson, the edge out of Stephen F. Austin, he was their 5th round pick. And he's kind of a different mold of pass rusher that we've seen from, typically Steve Spagnuolo has a very strict threshold of, length, density, ability to
Yeah.
play the run. BJ Thompson's kind of like their, exception to the rule, where he's a guy that can really, keep pressure up the arc with really great speed and burst, some flexibility. He might be a guy late in the season to watch. So if it's a dead heat late in the season, you might see BJ Thompson in some pass rush situations in that final game against the Chargers.
There we go. I think you and I were talking about the great work that the Bootleg Football Podcast does, and they were big on BJ Thompson, if I remember correctly. So, some good love there. All right, let's get back to the offense. Obviously, Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, that's the brain trust, right? But they're pivoting away from Eric Bieniemy this year as he's taking the job in Washington. Matt Nagy obviously coming back from Chicago. Last year as a quarterback's coach. This year he's the offensive coordinator. Is anything really going to change with Nagy, or is it kind of just going to be, business as usual, or is he going to bring some of that stuff that maybe he did in Chicago over to the Chiefs this year?
He might be like we kind of have we run some jokes that sometimes it looked like Matt Nagy was running Andy Reid's playbook from a couple years prior in Chicago. Like some of the bubble RPO stuff stuck around longer. No, like Matt Nagy. I think you saw his imprint a little bit last year with some things, and he's been a solid voice for this team this last season, and obviously just kind of getting thrust into a bigger role this year. He was a piece of Alex Smith's renaissance his last year in Kansas City. Kind of got him to sling the ball around the yard a little bit. So there's some familiarity with Patrick Mahomes that I think is really valuable, some synergy there. I don't really anticipate this group missing a beat, skipping a beat, honestly. It's been a pretty cohesive staff, and Nagy being here last year is a big help. And I think I don't think it's going to change all that much, because you're right, Andy always says he has 51% of the of the control, but like that extra 1% is heavy. It is a significant 1% right there. So no, I think they're well positioned. I think they'll be just fine.
Yeah. Obviously the other transition in offense, losing both offensive tackles, swapping them out with Jawaan Taylor, Donovan Smith. There was that like initial belief that Jawaan Taylor was going to be left tackle. Instead, he's sticking at the right side. Donovan Smith on a pretty decent contract. What has that transition been like for the Chiefs so far?
Well, it's interesting. Donovan Smith gets signed right after the draft, and we just got done talking about Felix and Udike Uzama as their first round pick. I'm not sure that they weren't looking at tackle pretty strongly. Maybe an Anton Harrison being part of that group, and some of the left tackle conversation might have been about Jawaan Taylor. Might have been to maybe slow down some of the speculation about that, but. Donovan Smith, I think it's well noted now. He had a rough season last year, played through some injuries and tried to tough some stuff out. These tackles look great. Early returns on this tackle group is fantastic. I would argue better. It's better than last year's situation, I would say. Better fits for what the Chiefs want to do, specifically Jawaan Taylor. Donovan Smith looked great in that first preseason game, looked healthy. And there's a lot of optimism that some people think that internally that the Chiefs have the best offensive tackle situation that they've had in Patrick Mahomes' tenure here, which is saying a lot, because Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz is a really good tandem. So there's optimism for that tackle group right now.
I think if you are an objective observer, I think you probably consider Taylor and Orlando Brown at worst case a wash. I would argue that Jawaan Taylor's a better player, but if you can get Donovan Smith from 2 years ago, then absolutely that's an upgrade, in the tackle situation as a whole. I mean, Andrew Wiley, no disrespect, is I think earned that contract with Washington, but you're talking about potentially two very clearly above average tackles here, which I think as if you guys needed the help, man. I mean, you got the best interior in the league, and now you get a great tackle situation too.
Yeah, no, if they pull this off with, I think Jawaan Taylor is a set it and forget it guy. It's always a little scary to kind of play the game that they're playing a little bit, I guess, with the left tackle position, with Donovan Smith. But I'm not slandering Orlando Brown, but they're used to helping their left tackle. So even if Donovan Smith doesn't play the same way he showed early on, in camp and in the preseason, like they have answers for it, and they've got really 4 strong offensive linemen around him. Like Donovan Smith might be maybe the weak link, and that's saying something. That could be a really good group.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Again, I love watching offensive line tape, and I think the Chiefs have one of the best in the league. Unfortunately for us, but should be fun, man. Hopefully we get Joey and Khalil healthy this year, and should be a
Yeah.
fun matchup.
Yep.
My last question about the offense is just this receiver group, because nationally there was a ton of hype about Kadarius Toney being like a wide receiver one. ESPN was really hyping that up this summer as something that the Chiefs believed in. He's obviously injured right now. To my knowledge, I don't think he's back, right?
No, he got injured before the first training camp practice started.
Oh.
It's he got injured in the warm-up, like the punt return warm-ups before the official practice even began.
There we go. All right. So that's an interesting one.
Not trying to laugh at it, but yeah.
Some guys just, I've told this story a couple times. I don't know if you Zach Moss, who plays for the Colts, he played at the University of Utah. He tore his MCL getting out of bed one time. So some guys just have that kind of luck.
Have the knack.
Anyways, so was the Kadarius Toney type hype ever real for you, or do you think that was kind of a summer thing? And without him, who do you think is going to kind of emerge as wide receiver one this year?
So, I mean, we spent a lot of time on our show talking about the wide receiver position this entire offseason. It seemed like a very clear, like, we'd like to see this addressed, and the talk about Kadarius Toney never rang true for us because he's just always been injury prone. And, even Brett Veach talks about, hey, we need him to have a good, we need him to have a good offseason, get through training camp healthy, can't get through the first practice. And that's always been like the big knock on him. Like his talent's undeniable. And like he made some big plays for this football team when he was healthy. He just was not healthy very often. And so, yeah, there's other guys that are, going to have to step up. And as far as like a true wide receiver one, like technically I would just call it Travis Kelce, because like all these guys are just going to be operating in the aggregate. I don't think there's going to be some guy that's just, a steady number 2 behind Kelce, I guess, or a true number. I don't think there's going to be a steady number 1 receiver. It's going to be different guys, different weeks. It'll be Marquez Valdez-Scantling one week, Sky Moore another week. It might be Rashee Rice, here or there. Even Richie James is getting some love. Patrick Mahomes loves Justin Watson. So like, I think it's just operating with, a roster deep in capable bodies, but maybe not necessarily a true wide receiver one. Although I think, a guy like Sky could emerge and have a solid season.
Sure. Very committee by approach, sounds like.
Yeah.
Last question. And then we'll get, yeah. Very okay. Last question, then we'll get you out of here. This has been great. I'm just curious because the Super Bowl hangover conversation is such a real thing. You're talking about the vibes at training camp. As somebody who covers this team, is there any concern for you about a hangover this year, or do you think it's going to be business as usual for the Chiefs?
I don't think it'll be a Super Bowl hangover, and it does fall on Mahomes. You got to remember, I think the best regular season record in the Andy Reid tenure in Kansas City, I think the best in franchise history, was immediately following the Super Bowl. So the year that they went and lost to Tom in that Super Bowl that next year, which, I mean, they made it again. I think they were 14-2. I think it was still 16 games. So they had their best record ever after that. And, Mahomes, it's kind of crazy to see Mahomes step into, the second act of his career. It's kind of weird saying that, honestly.
Yeah.
But, I think he's at a point where the young guys see him as that figure in a different way than maybe when he was 25. And so his presence in this team, in that locker room, is different. Not that he was never a leader, but it's different now. And I think there's such a standard being raised by him consistently, and the way he operates and how he works and what he expects and what he demands, that's kind of showing and revealing itself all over this. I'm not concerned about the Super Bowl hangover in its traditional sense. I don't know if they're as good of a football team. We'll find out. We'll see what happens with Chris Jones and how he performs. They don't have a Frank Clark. They're relying on some young guys in some spots. Is there a sophomore slump for the secondary? There's plenty of questions on this team, but just a true Super Bowl hangover. I don't know if that's going to be what is the fall of this team.
All right, there we go. Ken, this has been awesome, man. Where can Chargers fans go and find you if they want to get some great Chiefs intel throughout the season?
If you want to come talk smack on the KCSN YouTube channel, we do live shows every Monday night, Thursday night. We do game previews. If you want to get a perspective whenever the Chiefs are playing the Chargers this season, you can go check those out. But yeah, we got a lot of great Chiefs stuff going on KC Sports Network. If you ever want to know the enemy, by all means, come on over.
There we go. Love to see it. You guys are doing great work. Keep it up, obviously. And thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, man, anytime.